Well, good morning, viewers. Today we have a 2011 Dodge Ram. It's got the 5.7 Hemi in it, and it's here because the MIL is on, and the customer says it's not going into eco mode, which I imagine he said, which I imagine is the kick down to 4 cylinders. This has had some engine work done on it over the years, so we're going to connect the scan tool to it and see what's going on here. So I have the scan tool connected wirelessly to this vehicle, and it should auto ID. There it is. Pulls the mileage, display list, fitted list, and do a code scan. And answer the phone while it's doing this. Finished doing the network scan, and we've got some ugly looking codes. P1524, oil pressure out of range. And camshaft position sensor intermittent, probably related to low oil pressure, which kind of suggests that it actually has an oil pressure problem and not a sensor problem, like it could be a false reading from the oil pressure sensor. And then cylinder deactivation system bank 2, 3497, and those codes are in the TCM as well because that's the ECM. Torque request signal denied, that's probably because of the engine codes. Lost communication with left side satellite sensor, headlight circuits. I think it's got modified headlights in it, like HIDs or LEDs. Power window switch. Some HVAC codes. Trailer brake problem, he knows about that. Radio antenna, satellite and radio mismatch, and low tire pressure. Anyways, our major concern today is this oil pressure out of range and camshaft position and cylinder deactivation. I'm going to check the oil level. It's here for an oil change, but I wonder if it's low on oil. So I've checked the base engine oil level, and it's clean and full. This engine burns oil so much that the customer just simply adds between fuel fill-ups. He keeps adding oil to it, so the oil is actually not that bad. And it's probably a little heavier viscosity than it should be, but I don't think that would cause a low oil pressure problem. Looking at the oil pressure sensor voltage key on, engine off, it looks realistic, so we're going to start it and run it and see what the oil pressure drops to when it's hot. So we can see that it's running at about 41 psi, but we're going to let it run for a few minutes and see, because the engine is not hot at all. Maybe it's 15, 18 degrees Celsius. We'll be able to find temperature in here. Coolant temperature, voltage. Let's look at runtime. So I'm graphing the engine runtime in seconds, coolant temperature, voltage as a voltage, coolant temperature in degrees Celsius, oil temperature in degrees Celsius. Oil temperature is still -3. That seems odd. And of course the oil pressure sensor voltage and the oil pressure, we're down to 38.8 now, and it's been running for about 2.5 minutes. So I've been running it now for pretty close to 10 minutes. 600 seconds is 10 minutes. But I'm running it at a fast idle, trying to warm it up quicker. I noticed the engine oil temperature PID has not changed, so I'm not sure if it actually has an oil temp sensor or if there's a problem with it, but I don't think that's a major problem. We're at 90 degrees Celsius, and I think the thermostat hasn't opened yet. You should see it hit 91 to 95 and then drop slightly. At this RPM, which is about 2200, it's 37 psi. Just going to let it idle down now. Well, we still got 26 and a half psi. Now we'll let it run longer and see what happens. So you can see the thermostat opened at 95 Celsius, dropped down to 87, and it should stabilize around 91, 92. But you can tell that it peaked at 95 and now it's dropped down to 88, so it's climbing slightly, so it's thermostat's working fine, but that, you know, oil pressure is 25.5 psi right now, idling in park, which is not low. I'm going to check the spec. Well, according to this case, it says to check the oil pressure at 1100 RPM, and it should be at least 42 psi. I think I had it running at 2500 RPM and it was 3025, but I'm going to check. So I've got it running at 1100 RPM. Oil pressure is 30.7. Oil temperature is 86 Celsius, so it's not even up to operating temperature, oil temperature wise. That'll get as high as the engine temperature will. Coolant temperature is 89, stabilized at 89. So the oil pressure is a little low. I don't think it's an oil pressure sensor, but the only way to tell for sure is to put a manual gauge on it. So I'm going to contemplate doing that, and I want to run it and see just how low it gets. This temperature is climbing, so I suspect the oil pressure will drop as the oil thins out. And like I said, I think he's running a higher viscosity, like he possibly running 1030 because this thing burns so much oil. I think it's starting to look like engine time for this thing. The oil pressure pit is very erratic, and I don't know if that's typical or not. It seems unusual that the oil pressure voltage pit would be that erratic. So now it's dropped to like 28.4 psi. It's been running for 655 seconds. Seems odd. I wonder if it stops recording. I picked a custom data list. I wonder if this is not recording. It's not incrementing. It's flatlined at 656 seconds. Okay, well, we'll disregard that. It's been running for about 20 minutes now, and we're down to 2800 or 28 psi. So I'm going to drop the oil on this thing, put a fresh filter in it. Maybe the filter is causing an issue, and we'll have a look at it again afterwards. So there's the oil filter, and to the right, I'm sorry, left of the oil filter, you can see that electrical connector. That's the oil pressure sender. I'm looking at the bottom of this engine here, and this pan's getting a little rusty, but he's got a power steering leak out of the power steering boot, a little bit from the boot, and a little bit from the upper shaft seal on the steering gear, but we're just going to check the fluid level. That's a secondary issue if this thing needs an engine. Yeah, well, let's drain the oil and change it out, change the filter. So according to Wix, it calls for a 57899 filter, and this is what I took off. Mind you, it's a different brand, but it's a PH48, but it's significantly smaller filter. And I'm not sure if that's the correct application or not. Let me double check. 1500 RAM, 5.7, 57899. Well, we're going to see. So you can see the Wix filter has an anti-drain back valve in it, and this filter doesn't. So that'll cause a problem with oil draining back to the sump. Might cause a timing chain rattle on a startup, oil starvation on startup. But I'm not sure this, I'm pretty sure that this is the wrong filter on here. Mind you, this looks like a different thread size. Well, maybe not. It's just optical illusion because the filter body's so narrow. So it's back together and running with fresh oil in it. He has been running 1030 in this thing. It calls for 520. So I put 1030 back in it again. I think it burns so much oil that he just changes, or just puts oil in it every time he puts fuel in it. And it's had that issue apparently since the cylinder heads were redone, and head gasket failure, so it may have overheated and took out piston rings, or there could be a problem with valve seals. We're going to run it and see what the oil pressure drops to now, with fresh oil and the correct oil filter on it. So there's the oil pressure after running for about 45 minutes. I went and had lunch. You can see it's right up to temperature. The coolant temperature is 90. The oil temperature, well, that's wrong. Oil temperature is 95. This data parameter's got to be bogus. We've got 46 pounds of fuel pressure now at 1100 RPM, as you can see here. So definitely made a difference changing the oil in the filter. Now that filter could have been partially restricted. This engine burns so much oil, the customer doesn't change the oil, he just keeps adding oil to it. So in about 5,000 kilometers it goes through 5 liters. So he's basically changing the oil as he's driving it. And the last couple of times he put 1030 in it apparently, and that's what I put in it now. Now 1030 in my opinion shouldn't hurt this thing as long as he plugs it in cold weather. That's just my opinion, so don't jump all over me for that. Especially when it's got wear internally in the engine and it's losing oil pressure in various places anyways. If it was a healthy engine and putting 1030 in it would be too thick, too heavy, and it might cause a problem with the VVT system. But nevertheless, we're going to give it back to him like this and see what happens. Thanks for watching. So I'm sure this truck has got a valve seal problem, and one evidence of a valve seal issue is smoke on a hot restart. So it's been shut off now for about 15 minutes, and I'm going to fire it up again. So oil runs down the valve guides, pools on the underside of the intake and or exhaust valves, and of course when you fire it up it burns that oil off and you get a puff of blue smoke on a warm restart. It doesn't smoke noticeably while you're driving it, but it is consuming oil, I'm sure, through the valve seals or valve guides. That's why this customer doesn't change the oil, he just keeps adding to it between oil filter changes. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. I did verify that that filter that was on there was actually the wrong filter for the truck. It's not listed for this application at all. So, just a little extra. Thanks for watching.